Bin Laden is gone. Who is Washington's number one enemy now?
Washington's enemy is an enemy that doesn't exist. We're fighting an Islamic enemy that Washington believes is out to kill us because we have elections, because we're free, because we have women in the workplace. It's an enemy that doesn't exist. It didn't exist when bin Laden was alive. It doesn't exist now. America is being attacked because of its foreign policy in the Muslim world, because of its support for Israel, because of its support for the Saudi police state, because of its presence on the Arab Peninsula. And until we accept that, until Americans can say to each other, whether you support aid to Israel or not, our relationship with Israel is causing this war.
שהמחיר יהיה כבד מצוא, כרגע המחיר לא כבד מצוא, אז התקפה רבת היקף ברשות הפלסטינית. תביא אותם לפחד שהכל מתמוטט.
ואז, רגע, אבל אז השוק העולם יגיד מה אתם כובשים? אתה לא מפחד מהעולם, ביבי.
במיוחד היום עם אמריקה, אני יודע מה זה אמריקה. אמריקה זה דבר שאפשר להזיז אותו בקלות, להזיז לכיוון הנכון.
הם אומרים שהם בעדינו, אבל כאילו...
לא יכניעו לנו.
אז שאם אנחנו עושים איזה משהו, אז הם...
יש שם נניח שהם אומרים משהו. אז אמרו, 80% מהאמריקאים תומכים בנו. זה אבסורד, יש לנו שם תמיכה כזאת, ואנחנו אומרים מה נעשה עם הממשל ההוא היה פרו-פלסטיני בצורה קיצונית. לא פחדתי להתעמת שם, לא פחדתי להתעמת עם קלינטון, לא פחדתי להתעמת עם אבו. בלאו הכי את המחיר הבינלאומי אני משלם, אז עדיף לקבוע לקבל תמורה.
Well, I think if you really want to know the truth about the invasion of Iraq, there's clearly some incentives for the invasion. Oil, securing oil was one of them. Establishing permanent military bases in the region was another one. But a far less talked about reality is Israeli plans, which made clear that the Balkanization of surrounding countries, in particular Iraq, if we go to Oded Yanan's plan for Israel in the 1980s, it lays out very clearly a strategy of destabilizing all of the surrounding areas of Israel. This includes Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and even Egypt and Saudi Arabia.
Oded Yanon put forth such ideas that Israel should use its military power to destabilize and fragment Israel's enemies. This was put forth, as I said, in 1982 during the Begin administration, when, of course, Begin did invade Lebanon, and perhaps that was, though it failed, some historians have contended there was a broader plan intended there to affect more of the Middle East to advance Israeli security. I might say that the late Israel Shahak translated Yanon's study and into English, and the name of the translation was the Zionist Plan for the Middle East. Now, after 1996, the neoconservatives started to emphasize that the threat wasn't simply to Israel, but it was a threat to the United States, that there was a terrorist threat from the Islamic and Arab countries and groups in the Middle East, that the United States had to do something about it. The fundamental threat, they emphasized, came from Saddam Hussein in Iraq.
Democracy Spring is an anti-Donald Trump radical organization. And what I mean by that, we have to deconstruct again who's behind this radical Democracy Spring movement. You just have to do a basic internet search to know that George Soros, the billionaire, funds groups like MoveOn.org, also organizations like the Institute for Policy Studies and Demos that fund these radical events in Washington, D.C.
It all started in Tunisia in the end of 2010, when Mohamed Bouazizi, desperate with the lack of perspectives in his country, set himself on fire. His action caused commotion and protest throughout his country, culminating in 2011 with the resignation of President Ben Ali, who had been in power for 23 years.
حبيب علي مسعود بوعزيزي مسكن حي ولاد الهادي المهنة نتاعي فضاء كما تشوف حاجتين تبدلوا رئيس كان في المنفى ولا شاد كرسي والرئيسي كان شاد كرسي ولا في المنبر بتبدل حتى حكاية أخرى.
Later on, influenced by the revolt in Tunisia, the Libyans stood up against the rule of Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi has some disagreements with Western leaders, who embraced the opportunity to intervene militarily in his country, helping rebels to overthrow the former ruler. This intervention caused such disorder that Libya remains unstable to this day.
You know, Jeremy, the Western intervened in two Arab countries, Iraq and Libya. It is not coincident that both countries are oil-producing countries. They never intervened, for example, in Yemen, who actually are peaceful and they have, legitimate right to have democracy, to topple a dictator. There is also the same thing happening in Bahrain. We never had Western intervention simply because these countries are not oil-producing countries.
Can you deal with that argument, Bernard-Henri Levy?
Of course, I can deal with that argument. You know, if the real motivation, number one, it is not a Western intervention. It is an intervention with the blessing of United Nations.
Well, they're only American, French, and British planes.
No. There is a mandate of the United Nations which is very different from Iraq. Iraq was a war out of the law, without any mandate. That was one of the numerous reasons why it was a very nasty war. This one has a mandate of United Nations. Number two, this intervention to protect the civilians has the blessing of the Arab League. The Arab League was the first to express her concern about the fate of the civilians of Benghazi. So you cannot compare Iraq and Libya, number one. And number two, if there was a secret agenda of the awful Westerners to put the hand on the oil of Libya, there was a very good way to do it.
According to some, it's about protecting civilians.
And our resolve is clear. The people of Libya must be protected.
Others say it's about oil.
The only reason they're interested with Libya is about the oil. You'd think we'd be in Iraq if the major export there was broccoli.
But some are convinced intervention in Libya is all about currency, specifically Gaddafi's plan to introduce the gold dinar, a single African currency made from gold, a true sharing of the wealth.
It's one of these things that you have to plan almost in secret, because as soon as you say you're going to change over from the dollar to something else, you're going to be targeted. There were two conferences on this. One in '96 and another one in the year 2000, called the World Mataba Conference, organized by Gaddafi. And everybody was interested. I think most countries in Africa were keen.
Gaddafi didn't give up. In the months leading up to the military intervention, he called on African and Muslim nations to join together to create this new currency that would rival the dollar and euro. They would sell oil and other resources around the world only for gold dinars.
If you ask me how the world functions, then you have to understand one thing plain and simple. The head of the snake, the system of power, is headed by the financial system. The bankers rule the earth through the private control of the issuance of money, debt-based money, which we're all supposed to pay, ultimately with all of these things that they call austerity and whatnot. The bankers basically, through the control of the issuance of money, which allows them to provide themselves with an infinite supply of money, means they can buy anything and anyone that can be bought. So when we look at the vast majority of governments around the world, they're nothing more than puppets who are carrying out an agenda for the bankers. And the bankers at the top of this pyramid are, as I've said, plain and simple psychopaths. They're drunk on their own power. They're used to getting everything they want. They can buy anything and anyone that can be bought. And this explains the corruption of virtually every government we can look at. And the policies do not reflect the interests of the people. They reflect pure and simple the interests of the bankers.
In Egypt, the population revolted against dictator Hosni Mubarak in the beginning of 2011. Mubarak promised not to run for re-elections. Mohamed Morsi from the Muslim Brotherhood was then elected, But a great part of the Egyptian people did not accept his legitimacy, which ended up creating a new wave of protests. In 2013, Morsi was ousted from power by the military, and, similarly to Libya, the situation is yet to be defined. In Yemen, protests led to the resignation of Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had been in charge for more than 3 decades. It is in Syria, however, that the bloodiest conflict of the Arab Spring is happening, with a civil war between Assad's government, whose family has been in power for 46 years, and the rebels, composed by very diverse groups with often conflicting interests. Fearing that an intervention could cause more instability, like it happened in Libya, part of the international community is against military solutions for the situation in Syria. This paralyzes the United Nations Security Council, allowing Syrians to freely fight among themselves. It is believed that more than 130,000 people have already died in this conflict. There are also protests in Bahrain, in Algeria, in Morocco, in Jordan, and in Oman, without regime change in any of these cases.
Oh dear, just when you thought the Iraq problem was solved because you haven't heard about it for a while, everything's back to murderous chaos and terror. What happened? In 2003, the US invaded Iraq because of its alleged connections to terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. At the time, Saddam Hussein, a brutal dictator, ruled the country. He was part of the Sunni minority and suppressed the Shia majority. Iraq was conquered fairly quickly, but the US had no plan for the country. The until then suppressed Shia majority took over and began oppressing the Sunnis because suppressing other faiths has proven to be such a good idea. Unsurprisingly, a Sunni rebel uprising began and terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda trickled into Iraq, and local forces, often former Sunni military, began fighting the US troops and the newly formed Iraqi state, peaking in a bloody civil war in 2006. Since then, people in Iraq have basically been segregated by religion. So, in a tragic irony of history, the US invasion led to the formation of the very terrorists the US wanted to eliminate in the first place, because Iraq was now the perfect training ground for terrorism.
What they call the Mossad when they deal with publicly?
I thought it was a reasonable question, but the trouble is you can't pick up the phone book. There's no Langley in Israel that you can look up, CIA, or in our case, the Mossad. We thought we should ask, what shall we call it in English? You can translate the Hebrew words, as I said, Mossad is institute, but when they write a letter to their friends in the CIA or the British intelligence, what do they call themselves? It took a while. It was a matter of asking the Prime Minister's spokesman. The best you could do, because officially the Mossad is under the Prime Minister's office. And I think he sort of wondered why you want to know and all that, so we explained. And he came up with the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. I mean, if it were to have initials, it would be ISIS.
Anyone who spent a minute looking into the rise of ISIS knows that the U.S. played a huge hand in creating them. They spent billions of dollars training and arming rebels across the region. They completely dismantled the government in Iraq and then left the country in complete shambles with an incredibly weak puppet regime in place. And of course, the U.S. continues to mess around in the area, angering people who are sick of being pawns in American war games. So, it's just a fact that the U.S. was a big creator of ISIS.
A released video has shed more light on foreign military aid to ISIL Takfiri militants in Iraq. According to Iraqi media, the video released by the Iraq-based Hezbollah brigades shows a U.S. Chinook helicopter dropping 2 boxes full of weapons for ISIL militants by flying at a low altitude in the Al-Abbar area south of Fallujah. The video has been recorded on February the 9th. Earlier, there were reports that some U.S. helicopters landed in Fallujah, which is the main base of Takfiri militants in Iraq. The reports fueled speculation that the U.S. is providing militants with weapons. That prompted Iraqi lawmakers to urge the government to open an investigation into that matter.
Я тоже об этом сказал. Вот президент Обама упомянул об одной из угроз, это ИГИЛ. Ну а кто помогал вооружать людей, которые в Сирии боролись с Асадом-то? Кто создавал благоприятный политический информационный климат? Кто подталкивал к поставкам оружия? А вы чего, разве вы не понимаете, кто там воюет? Там воюют наемники. В основном. Вы знаете, что там платят деньги? И они воюют там, где платят больше. Вот они вооружились, им платят определенную сумму. Мне даже называли эти суммы, которые им платят. Они там воюют уже с оружием, все, у них уже не отнимешь. Потом выяснилось, что в другом месте чуть-чуть начали побольше платить. Они там туда перетекут.
I for one have no doubt whatsoever that the terrorist group named after a Sumerian alien goddess and 24/7 on mainstream media has always been a fabrication of the shadow government. But in case you're still not convinced, these pictures of the US Senator John McCain meeting a group of mercenaries in Syria in 2013 might change your mind. And that's because one of them bears an uncanny resemblance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who is supposed to be the head of the terrorist group named after a Sumerian alien goddess. According to several sources on the internet, unverified documents released by the former CIA double agent Edward Snowden, and supposedly in possession of various outlets of the US mainstream media, reveal that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is not only highly trained by Mossad and the CIA, but also that the whole ISIS operation is a joint of the US, Israeli and British intelligence, what would explain how American supplies and weapons allegedly destined to the Syrian and Turkish resistance ended up in the hands of ISIS militias.
On February 25th, the FBI arrested 3 men from New York suspected of trying to join ISIS and encourage domestic terrorism. A day later, it was revealed that ISIS's most famous video host, Jihadi John, was recruited from the UK. So how many foreign fighters have joined ISIS and why? Well, recent reports estimate that more than 20,000 foreign fighters have joined ISIS and other extremist groups in Iraq and Syria. The National Counterterrorism Center reports that approximately 5,000 of these fighters are from Western countries, including about 150 Americans. The Soufan Group, a global intelligence service, reports that as of 2014, 700 recruits came from France, 400 from the United Kingdom, and more than 800 came from Russia. However, most foreign fighters hail from the Middle East and North Africa. The majority of fighters are male, between the ages of 18 and 29. Many are recent converts to Islam. Much research has been devoted to why so many fighters defect to join ISIS. The director for the International Center for the Study of Radicalization says that some people seek adventure, while others are ideologically motivated. He also notes that ISIS is less selective than a lot of other groups about who can join their ranks. The U.S. Council on Foreign Relations has attributed ISIS's popularity to their image as a force for justice against Western capitalism. Coupled with ISIS's highly visible and savvy recruiting techniques, there has been an explosion in foreign fighters joining ISIS.
This is our Khilafah in all its glory, remaining and expanding. It was established in the year 1435 Hijri. Its leader from the tribe of Quraysh is Sheikh Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and its territory is already greater than Britain, 8 times the size of Belgium and 30 times the size of Qatar. It's a state built on the prophetic methodology, striving to follow the Quran and Sunnah, not a secular state built on man-made laws whose soldiers fight for the interests of Taghut legislators, liars, fornicators, corporations, and for the freedoms of sodomites. We are men honored with Islam who climbed its peaks to perform jihad, answering the call to unite under one flag. This is the source of our glory, our obedience to our Lord. We are uncompromising in our call to Tawheed. We only bow to Allah, unlike the countless deviant factions raising their false banners and changing with the winds of Jahili politics. Yes, we are the soldiers who stopped the idols of nationalism, demolished the shirky symbols of Palmyra and Nineveh, and destroyed the Sykes-Picot borders. For there is no honor to be found in the remnants of shirk and nationalism, and no difference between an Arab and a non-Arab, or a black man and a white man, except through piety. This is the glory of faith that unites us. Justice is served with the establishment of the Islamic courts, and there are thousands of masajid and schools for our cubs and pearls, where they prepare themselves to share in the great rewards of expanding this Khilafah. America, you claim to have the greatest army history has known. You may have the numbers and weapons, but your soldiers lack the will and resolve. Still scarred from their defeats in Afghanistan and Iraq, they return dead or suicidal, with over 6,500 of them killing themselves each year. So while you go around cooking the facts on the results of your military airstrikes, we continue to haunt the minds of your soldiers and sow fear into their hearts, with 18 of your soldiers committing suicide each day before you've even advanced. And in addition to the $6 trillion price tag on your war against the Muslims, you're now too weak to put boots on the ground. You opt instead to attack us from the air with missiles, each worth $250,000, while we send your proxies to hell with 50-cent bullets. Then there's your new coalition of devils, with Iran, Turkey, and Russia joining the fray. That's because the Milov Kufr will always unite you together to fight the truth. So bring it on, all of you.
You see what I'm saying? We came here and they weren't here. We came here to fulfill Allah's commands. When Allah said in Surah Baqarah verse 63 and verse 93, hold fast, hold firmly to what you've been given. When he said hold firmly to what you've been given, when he said it to Musa, we've come to fulfill that.
Alexander Prokhanov told the state-controlled outlet that Mossad is also likely to have transferred some of its spying experience to the leadership of ISIS, even as Israeli military advisors assist the terrorists in other ways.
And Israel itself as a country is not the problem. The real problem is the leaders of the Jewish American community in the United States who influence and corrupt our Congress to support Israel when we have no interest there.
You imply that the Israeli lobby is dragging the United States into the wars, into the conflicts?
So you looked and you found it. Obviously, you just heard the State Department spokeswoman, tell me, look, they haven't yet authenticated the video. Are you certain it is what it claims to be?
The video shows the beheading of Steven Sutcliffe. The location where the video was obtained from is the location that ISIS usually uploads their original videos to. The video shows a clear message from ISIS that follows the same message that it had before. And in fact, within a short time after our release, ISIS account on social media indicated that within short time they will be releasing the video. Only we actually had that video beforehand and were able to beat them with the release.
Are you saying we're going to see further radicalization of the region?
Oh, especially in Africa. Yes, ma'am. The guns that are flowing out of the 3 places where there were Arab Spring revolts are going to cause problems in Somalia, across North Africa, and in Nigeria.
Another year, another war. This time the French are in Mali. They say they're there to help, to defeat the rebels, and to liberate the country. There are those who are a little more skeptical of France's motives for being in Mali. On this week's In Focus, we travel to Africa's newest front line to discover the real reasons yet another country has been plunged into chaos.
Now, you have great knowledge and strong opinions about events in the Middle East. Iran has recently softened its attitude towards its opponent after decades of deadlock. Israel is annoyed, and how do you see that developing?
I think it's a reflection of the sanity of the people around the world who realize that any kind of attack on Iran is tantamount to initiating a full-scale Third World War, which of course could very well and inevitably would lead to a war with China and Russia. This is pure madness. And those of us who've lost loved ones or who have served in combat, like myself, and others who know the devastating cost of war, not just for the so-called victor, because the only victor really is the bankers, quite frankly. But even those who supposedly on the winning side suffer greatly. And testimony to that fact, aside from the 1 million to 2 million dead in Iraq, is the 22 American servicemen a day who are committing suicide because of the horrendous things that they were called to do in places like Afghanistan and Iraq.